We're going to be talking about the row command that can be put onto the John Deere planters, basically run with either a swath control, section control, depending on which display you have. Some of the things we're going to cover is basically how to set it up. You know, it's real crucial. You know, our timing settings, our dimension settings, that we get those right, so we'll be running through those. But to start with, we're just going to run over on the home page here of what things are going to look like when you're going through the field. When you're going through the field planting, if everything, clutches are all engaged, this is what we're going to see, is the green bars down here. If I manually turn them off, you're going to see that they turn black and we're not planting there. If it's actually disengaged because of the swath, these sections right here, instead of being green, they'll be a neutral color. The color of this screen in the background, in this case here, is going to be a tan color in there, is what you're going to see when a section is turned off by the swath control itself. With that, we're going to go on to setting up of the swath. And setting up of the swath, you know, we're going to go into the main menu and GS2 Pro. And right over here, a couple real important things we've got. We've got equipment in here, and we've got our section control or swath control, whatever. But we'll start with the equipment. You know, basically, what we need to do, guys, is get a tape measure out and get the dimensions that they're asking for. In here, you know, we've got our machine in there, and then we've got change offsets in here. You know, if you're just doing mapping, these offsets aren't quite so critical. I mean, we should have them in there. But when it comes down to running these row clutches, these dimensions have to be measured and measured to the T. So what we want to do, we've got a dimension B right here, which is going to be that dome to the rear axle. So we want to make sure we get that dimension in there of whatever it is. Get our tape measure out, measure from the center of that dome back to the axle. Okay, now there's two different variations in here. One is going to be if we've got a track tractor, is what they're showing here, and over here it's showing it on a row crop tractor, and there they're measuring to the axle. On a track tractor, what they're measuring from is basically the turning point of that track, which is basically the center of the track. So you would measure from that dome to the center of the track and get that marked down on your sheet for dimension B. If you got a mechanical or a row crop tractor, we're going to go from that dome to the axle, mark that down for letter B. Okay, now letter C, and here again on the row crop, we're just going from a axle to the pivot point. Right here they're kind of showing that hitch back there, but remember on your planner it's probably going to be that pivot point. So you're going to get that dimension. On that track tractor, we went from what that dimension was, where our steering point was, back to our pivot point of that tractor. And we're going to get those dimensions put into letter B and letter C. Letter D is going to be the inline height of the receiver, which is also done on the setup page for the Starfire itself. Letter A is just going to be an offset. For the most part, we're never really going to put anything in there. So with that, we're just going to accept, and we've got the same thing when we go to the implement. We've got some dimensions in there. You know, we've got to have our planner in there. We've got change offsets here. In there, we've got letter A, which is the inline distance from the connection point to the front of the implement. So I just measure to the frame. And then I measure from the frame to the drop point of the seed on letter B. Now really, guys, to tell you the truth, you can actually, if you was to measure from that dome of the tractor all the way back to that drop point of the seed, have everything at 0, but say letter B, I could put that whole dimension in there if I wanted to. But if you're going to do it, just go ahead and measure it right. You know, it's going to help. If you're doing mapping and you do it that way, it's not going to turn out right on your mapping. You might get your row command to work, but it won't turn out right for your mapping. So just go ahead and make all the measurements, get them in there, and hit your accept key. Like I said, the other thing we've got is the swath or the section control down here. So we'll go into there. We've got a couple settings in there that we need to pay attention to. One is going to be the overlap setting. and just basically, do I want it to come out past that headland when we're running at an angle, or do I want it to go at the other? You know, so that's kind of a pick and choose. Most guys I know usually run right like here. And we've got the same thing for interior boundaries and our coverage there, so where we're running into a covered area. So with that, we'll get those set the way we want, hit our accept key. The real important thing is our turn on, turn off times. Turn on and turn off. Turn on is going to be when we're in the headland and going to head back into the field. Turn off time is when we're in the field going into that headland. These times right here are kind of relatively close for what a planner is. You know, every year I've got guys asking me, what's the dimensions I put in here, and what's the time I put in here. What works on one guy's doesn't necessarily work on another one, so keep that in mind. You're just going to have to go out there and double check. You know, don't rely on what somebody else is using and thinking it's going to work. Couple things to keep in mind on this turn on, turn off time up here. The smaller the number I put in there, say for every 1/10 of a second smaller that I make this number, so if I put this 6/10 down to 7/10, it's going to move that seed placement forward. Say turn off time, we're coming up to the headland and it's shutting off a foot ahead of where it should. One thing to keep in mind, every 1/10 of a second is going to be roughly 7 inches when I'm going 5 miles an hour. So if I was shutting off a foot soon and I moved that down 2/10 of a second, it's going to get me real close. Same thing over here on turn on time. I'm into the headland and it's turning on too soon, too late, whatever it is. Like I say, a smaller number here. If this is our headland right here, this line, and I'm turning on too soon, so that it's planting actually, I'm coming back in, I'm turning on too soon, it's coming on right here. So now, if I put a smaller number, it's going to move that placement forward. Bigger numbers, going to move it backwards from that line. I do have some sheets that you can grab, and you know, we'll have it posted on our website also under our quick references and training tab for turn on, turn off times for swath. But you know, basically, like I say, 5 miles an hour, 1/10 of a second, about 7 inches. Smaller number moves placement forward. One other thing to keep in mind, there might be times, I've seen it several times, that I can't get this turn off time when I'm coming up to that headland. I can't get that down low enough. It only lets me go down to a 0.3 second in there. Well, there's times I can't get that dimension or that time short enough. I've made my measurements on the planner. That planner is right. There's times I've had to change the length of that planner to get this turn on time, to get it, or turn off when I'm coming up to the headland to work right. So okay, I lengthened out my planner. Lengthening out that planner again is going to move my seed placement forward. Shorter planner is going to move it back. So at any rate, like I say, I made my measurements. They're right, but that's what I had to do to get it to work. Okay, I got my turn off time working right now, but when I did that, that just messed up my turn on time. So then I'm going to have to adjust that turn on time accordingly. So with that, enough said on the turn on, turn off times, and enough said on our dimensions. Like I say, they're both real critical. There is only one way you're going to know that this thing is working right. You can't look at the display. You can't just be looking at that planner display and watching those segments for the clutches, you know, the little green bars we had, like right here. We can't just be looking at that and saying, boom, they came on at the right time, I know it's set right. No, you have to go out and dig it. You know, there's guys that have relied on this. There's guys that have forgot a dimension, whatever it be. And there might be a 6 or 7 foot gap in that field because of it. So it is imperative that we go out and dig. Couple other things to mention. Some other things that can affect the way a swath control works. The very first one I want to mention is right here. We got our home page and we've got this satellite icon here. Just something you can go out and try yourself someday. You get in your tractor, you have that dome unplugged, you plug it back in. As soon as I get signal up just enough to where it says SF2 on here, or SF1, whatever it is you got You quick set an AB line, and then you stop, and you just sit there. You watch, within 15 minutes, you'll see that line down here move feet. It moves a bunch. Well, what I'm heading to is you go into a field, we don't have this signal built up, and it keeps acquiring signal, and I'm doing headlands where I got a poor signal. Guess what? Our headlands moved. With auto track, we can go in there and we can just do a shift track, straighten our line out. With swath control, section control, row command, no, we cannot move that headland coverage. So we just messed ourselves up. So always, always make sure we've got a good signal down here before we ever start. If we've got a problem with signal, it's going to give us a problem with our shutoff. Next thing to keep in mind is to make sure that when we're coming into those headlands, going into the headland, going back into the field, that we're at a consistent speed. Remember, if we were going at 5 miles an hour, a tenth of a second, changed at 7 inches, it's the same thing. If I come up to that at 2 miles an hour and I was normally going at 5 miles an hour, it's going to have an effect on that seed placement. So, I'm not saying that you have to go into the headland and go back into the field at the same speed, but whatever you were doing when you were setting up and getting everything adjusted right, we need to be consistent with that across the whole field, because if we're not going to have a consistent spacing again. And one other thing, guys, is the higher the level of accuracy, when we've got an SF1, as time goes on, that line moves. Same thing with our headland coverage, it moved. With SF2, it's not going to move as much. With RTK, it's not going to move, period. So one thing to keep in mind, I went in there and I was running a swath control on SF2. I got about half done with the field, started raining, went home that night, whatever it is. I come back 2 days later, most likely that headland coverage has moved. That swath is not going to work. I cannot shift that headland coverage. So just some things to keep in mind when operating swath of what can affect the swath control, section control, whatever it is you have. So with that, if you got any questions, guys, get a hold of us and we'll get them answered for you.